When I was 19, I decided to do something that I really had no idea if I could do. I grew up in the exurbs of this city, in central New Jersey, when it was still mainly sod farms and swamp forests. But I never really could enjoy that because I had really bad asthma when I was a kid. I couldn't run for more than 5 minutes without wheezing and not being able to breathe. And so when I was 19, I decided I was going to bike across America. I left Washington, D.C. with about 30 other people. We were raising money for Habitat for Humanity, sleeping in churches along the way. And I didn't know the first day if I could do it. The first day was all right. We were in the D.C. suburbs. The second day was all right. We were in the D.C. exurbs. And then the third day, we started climbing the hills on the way to Charlottesville. And we went up one hill and down another hill, and up another hill and down another hill. And that's when I started to really think, I don't know if I really can do this. I was wheezing. I couldn't really breathe clearly. And by that night, when I barely had made it to the church in Charlottesville, I didn't know how I was going to make it the next day up over the Appalachians to the Blue Ridge Parkway. A decade later, I was back in New Jersey. I was sitting in my house in the middle of a blizzard, and I again was faced with a situation where I had no idea if I could actually do what I had to do. Chris Christie had just taken office as the governor of New Jersey 10 days ago, and one of the first things that he did was issue an executive order shutting down the Fair Housing Agency in New Jersey that was the center of my work and of 40 years of civil rights history. We had to figure out if we could challenge it, but I couldn't even get to my office 5 minutes away. And it was about this time that my decision to not have Wi-Fi at home based on some philosophical concept of separation from the internet didn't seem like such a good idea. If I sat just the right way in my kitchen on a chair without any desk with my laptop, I could just get the Wi-Fi signal from my neighbor. And that's where I sat in the middle of one of the worst blizzards in New Jersey history, researching New Jersey constitutional law and coming to the realization that only 2 times in the entire history of the state had anyone on any topic successfully blocked a governor of New Jersey. The governor of New Jersey has more power than any other governor in the United States from issuing an executive order. But we had to move forward because even if we didn't know if we could do it, there really wasn't any other way out. We couldn't just let him shut down 40 years of fair housing history to say that towns could exclude people with lower incomes, Latinos, African Americans, people with disabilities, just because they didn't want them as their neighbors. And also the precedent it would set on executive power that Governor Christie could take this and shut down the state's campaign finance agency and make it report directly to him, that he could shut down environmental agencies, that he basically could just invalidate the will of the legislature and act as basically a dictator. Was just too dangerous a precedent, especially with Governor Christie's now nationally famous ways of trying to take as much power as possible. And so we pressed on, and the brief that we wrote in the middle of the blizzard and somehow filed after I called the courts and figured out how in the world we were going to even reach the judges who had to decide them when all the state offices were closed, resulted in an injunction against Governor Christie moving forward. But one thing about Chris Christie, and I think a lot of people now see this as he's preparing to run for president, is that he's unrelenting. We won, but he kept trying. And he tried again, and he tried again, and he kept doing different things. Even though the courts had already said he couldn't shut down the state's fair housing agency, he kept tried doing different ways to do it. And finally, the fight had reached such a magnitude that only the New Jersey Supreme Court could decide it. That was January of this year. And I was up there, never having argued a case before the New Jersey Supreme Court, and now arguing what was the most important case about executive power in at least 30 years. I thought I was ready. I thought I'd figured it out. And I had all kinds of moot courts and practices and did all kinds of research. But within 5 minutes of getting up there, the very experienced lawyer for Governor Christie on the other side threw out something that had never come up before, claimed that in 1972, a former governor had done exactly the same thing with exactly the same kind of agency, and this was well-settled law. I had no idea what he was talking about. In the courtroom, there actually was Wi-Fi, so I sat there kind of, it don't really look that great when you whip out your laptop when you're preparing for arguing in the state Supreme Court. But, so I took out my laptop and I tried to figure out what in the world they were talking about. But I couldn't figure it out. I mean, it wasn't really readily accessible. It wasn't really anywhere. So the only thing I could do when I got up there is plead for some kind more time. And I just said, we've gotten to this point. Usually when you argue a case before the highest court in the state, that's sort of the end of the process. But I said, please, if you're going to consider this, let me send in another brief. Of course, at that point, I had no idea what I was going to say if I had that chance, because I had no idea what they were actually talking about. But sure enough, we got a letter, terse facts, in fact, from the chambers of the Chief Justice a couple weeks later, saying, all right, you can send in some more information, and giving a very, very short time frame for doing so. I didn't really know where to look. He's talking about something that happened in an obscure agency in 1972, not exactly something that's easily findable through Google. And so, so I started calling around people I knew, and I went to the state law library. There's absolutely nothing. I looked on Westlaw. There's nothing. Have less than a week left, and someone told me about this obscure office in this obscure corner of Trenton that had some of these agencies' records. So I go there, and first of all, it's not really an office that members of the general public very often visit. So I had to talk my way into there, and they sent someone to sort of monitor me as I was looking through the files. That's government transparency. I was looking through. I figured, if this was this big thing that changed the structure of the agency, and the governor had just really overhauled what it was doing, it might be in the history of the agency, which there were several published histories, and there's nothing there. I looked in the annual reports for the relevant years, 40 years ago, nothing there, nothing. And I'm running out of time because there's only a limited number of hours that this office actually allows the public to come in and look at files. And so I start looking through these boxes of minutes, and I don't think anyone had looked at these boxes of minutes in many years. But suddenly, there was this one line in this one meeting that said, Governor Cahill, the governor at the time, happens to be from the town I live in, had issued this executive order, and it's not anticipated to have any effect on the operations of our agency. I said, okay, well, that's actually exactly the opposite of what Governor Christie's lawyer said at the Supreme Court. And so, hastily made a photocopy, wrote up a very quick brief, sent it in. And 3 months later, we got back a very strongly worded 5-2 decision from the New Jersey Supreme Court saying that Governor Christie had asserted that this was something that had happened before. And in the words of the court, that did not happen. So I kept going on that bike trip after that third day in Charlottesville. And it's funny because, the thing that was looming in my mind was biking over the Rockies. You got this crazy huge physical challenge. How is this kid from, central New Jersey, which is as flat as it gets, who couldn't even breathe there, going to bike over a 10,000-foot pass over the Rocky Mountains? But that actually wasn't what was really hard about it. I really quickly figured out that, maybe I wasn't maybe the fastest biker in the group, but that I could handle it and I could get through the physical challenge. But we got in the middle of the trip to eastern Kansas. And that's what, in my mind, Kansas is flat, it's going to be nice and easy. That's going to be the nice respite in the middle of the country. But there's a reason why most people biking across the country go from west to east instead of east to west. Anyone have any idea what that might be? There's prevailing winds. What? Downhill. Well, that's that too. But the prevailing winds go from west to east, and when you get to Kansas, where there's really nothing except for the wind, you really feel that pretty strongly. And so, the first day going into Kansas was just kind of a tough day. We just kind of kept biking into these very strong winds, and it was just and it was like biking past the same cornfield like every hour. And so we got to the church that night, and we woke up the next day, and we biked into the same wind, and it just kept going and going and going. And after like several days of this, I was like, this is really just, this is really, really tough. And there was just this moment about a half hour into one of those last days in Kansas where I couldn't do it anymore. And I sat down, I got off my bike and I sat down on the side of the road, and there's just, cattle trucks going by you. There's not, right in between the cattle trucks and the cornfields. And I just sat there. I didn't know how I was going to keep doing it. It was just, I physically could do it, but just mentally, it was just like, how do you keep, going and going and through the same thing all day? But, at the end of the day, if you want to really get where you're going, sometimes you just got to keep biking into the wind. Thanks.